Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane. I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts, and I am super excited to be here with Dr. Kathryn Harkup, who wrote this amazing book called V is for Venom, and she's going to be talking all about the chemicals or the poisons that Agatha Christie used in her books to kill off people, and just the history and how it came about, and why they're so poisonous and things like that. It's going to be incredibly fascinating. But before we get to our conversation, I just wanted to say that thank you to the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting all of our programs. We can't do this fun stuff without them. And also to Kathryn for letting us share this program with other libraries, because anybody who knows me knows I'm about to say that when libraries get together, we make magic. And obviously, this is going to be sort of a magical talk, maybe like a deathly talk, but a magical deathly talk. You can buy signed books by Kathryn from Aesop's Fable, our favorite local indie bookstore. You can also order them from your local library. I know we have it, although it is out right now. So put it on reserve and you will get in line to read it because you're going to want to. Maybe you're going to want to read A is for Arsenic first, which is the first book in this, I guess, series, but it's not really serialized. They're two different poisons. I am going to turn the slides off during Kathryn's talk, her slides, so that you're not distracted. And I'll turn it back on when she's done so you can chat with each other. If you have questions, though, please put them in the Q&A, which is a button at the bottom of your screen, so that I can moderate those after the slides. So welcome, Kathryn. Thank you so much for doing this. I have been looking forward to it for months.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
It was an easy one, but I'm going to go off screen and let you talk about Agatha, and then I'll be back in about 40 minutes.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm assuming you're here either because you love Agatha Christie or you just want to know how to kill people. Either way, we can cover those bases, although I should just say, please, please don't kill people. This talk is very much for information. It is not recommendation. Please take notes, but do be warned, all of those notes will be there and they will be used in your prosecution. So be careful what you write down and be careful what you put in the chat as we go along. So this is a talk all about Agatha Christie, obviously, and her brilliant use of poisons, because I think she, more than any other writer, used more poisons to kill more characters more accurately than any other crime writer I know of. She is not just the Queen of Crime, the Duchess of Death. To me, she is the Princess of Poisons. And she wrote about so many different poisons, I could get 2 books out of her. So thank you very much, Agatha Christie. I much appreciate your work. So V is for Venom is very much about the more obscure poisons that she used in her plots. So this is not the arsenic, the cyanide, the ones that everyone's kind of heard of. If you do have questions about those, by all means ask. But this is about the obscure stuff. So where on earth did Agatha Christie get this information from? Because this is not readily available. And the answer is that this wonderful woman who wrote a huge number of murder mystery stories during the First World War, so before she was a writer, she volunteered, like many women in the UK, to be a nurse. And she soon found that being a nurse didn't really agree with her. She liked the work well enough, but her family worried about her walking home at dark hours, early hours of the morning, and they worried about her safety. So they suggested, or someone suggested, that when a new dispensary opened in the hospital, that she might want to work there because it was regular office hours and she would be able to arrive and leave at a more sensible time. So that's what she did. She trained to be what was called an apothecary's assistant, which is basically a pharmacist's assistant today. And this was a time long before anything was pre-packaged, pre-weighed. You made out prescriptions that were handwritten by doctors, and these doctors could pick and choose what they put into their prescriptions. There were They could be very bespoke, these prescriptions. So first of all, you decipher the doctor's handwriting, then you take down the appropriate bottles and you mix it with various other bits and pieces, and you press them into pills or you mix them into salves or lotions. So it is a technical skill. You have to have a deep scientific knowledge of what you are working with. You have to understand how these drugs interact with each other as well as with the body. You also have to understand how to make them into pills and lotions. So there is an art to this. And the exams that you have to pass to do this job are very, very difficult because if you get something wrong, you are potentially getting things dangerously wrong. You could kill people if you make a mistake. This was also a time when the UK was moving from imperial measurements to metric, and Christie hated the metric system because she said if you get your decimal point in the wrong place, you can go 10 times too wrong and you can give someone 10 times too much of a poison, which can be the difference between a therapeutic dose and a lethal dose. So she sat her exams and she failed. Now, she passed all the theory, so all of that was locked away, but she failed on the practical side of things because there were many different tests. And she resat the practical exams and she passed a second time. And she went to work in the dispensary and she had a great time. But she soon found that she learnt the doctor's kind of prescriptions. She knew what sort of things she was going to be making up each day. So she spent her mornings making up the basics, the stocks. And then in the afternoon, she had a bit of time on her hands and she got bored. So, to alleviate this boredom, she decided that she would write a murder mystery story. And she talked to her sister about this. And her sister was a better known writer at the time. And her sister said, "Don't do that. That's really difficult. Murder mysteries are hard. Try something easier." And I think this put Agatha's back up a little bit. She's like, no, I'm going to prove my sister wrong. I am going to write a murder mystery novel. And so she sat down and she wrote The Mysterious Affair at Styles, which, if you have read it, is heavily influenced by her recently acquired knowledge of pharmaceuticals. In that particular book, 3 compounds are used to kill one person, and it's how all of those drugs interact with each other that key points in the plot as we go along. So, with this vast knowledge of pharmaceuticals, Christie again volunteered to work in a hospital dispensary during the Second World War. But between the wars, she just concentrated on her writing. But she kept up to date with pharmaceutical advances, and she had a well-stocked library of toxicology, and she corresponded with experts to make sure that her knowledge was really up to date. This meant she had a vast repertoire to draw upon when it came to poisons, and she could, like a doctor would pick bespoke compounds for their patients, Christie picked bespoke poisons for her plots. So I'm going to talk about just 2 of those poisons because I think they're interesting in illustrating that Christie is not always the stereotypical writer that perhaps we think she is. She is very much associated with arsenic in cups of tea served to the local vicar, country villages, all of that kind of stuff. But she was far more creative than that, and I hope to illustrate this with the 2 examples that I've picked. So the first example comes from Agatha Christie's Miss Marple's Final Cases. And this is a collection of short stories. And one of these stories involves a woman who moves to a new village with her newly acquired husband. And she feels very unsettled in this new environment. There's this creepy figure in the village, and she's just deeply unsettled. And one day, she's out riding her horse, something startles the horse, and she is thrown. Now, when she is on the ground, her husband rushes up to her. She's bundled into the local house, which is nearby, and she's unconscious, and unfortunately, she never regains consciousness, and she dies. So everyone thinks, it was a terrible accident. She was on edge. She wasn't perhaps concentrating on what she should have been, and terrible, but that's the end of it. Of course, this story is told to Miss Marple, and she realizes that there's a lot more going on. In all of the fuss around the wife when she was immediately thrown from the horse, someone was very careful and injected her with a compound called Strophanthin, which had been stolen from a local pharmacy. Now, Strophanthin is a really interesting choice. It's a very, very obscure medicine. It was had a very brief period of, well, I was going to say popularity, but it wasn't even that popular. So this is a really unusual choice. And Christie used it 3 times, and every time she had to explain it's a heart medicine. Now, in actual fact, it is a lot more than that. It was originally an arrow poison that originated in the African continent. This was a compound that could be extracted from plants, and it was used by local tribes to tip their arrows, which were fired into big game, and this poison was powerful enough to bring down large animals, but it was still safe enough to eat the meat from those animals afterwards. It was also quite useful for fending off Europeans who wanted to come and invade their territory. That was less successful. The Europeans also failed to take any warning from this onslaught of toxic arrows. And yeah, they took no interest in the arrows, the people firing them, or what was on the tips until a certain group of explorers decided to dig a little deeper, not just into the continent, but into the flora, fauna, traditions, everything in this particular new world. So these people are, I will introduce you to them. This is, oh, get in the middle of them. This one here, this is Dr. Livingston, I presume. And this guy over here, got to get it the right way around. So that's Dr. Livingston. This is Dr. John Kirk. And this pair of Victorians went to deepest, darkest Africa in search of strange new worlds to seek out anything valuable, basically, that they could take back to Europe with them. In their travels, they came across some of these poisoned arrows and they collected samples of the poison, the arrows themselves, and for reasons best known to Dr. John Kirk, he decided to store these samples in the same bag with his toothbrush. Now, hindsight obviously is a wonderful thing. You can probably predict where this is going. So one morning, Dr. Kirk is feeling rather unwell. He's got a bit of a fever, so he's feeling under the weather. He's also got an elevated heart rate as a result of this fever. And as he's brushing his teeth, he notices that his heart rate slows down. He also notices quite an unusual taste on his toothbrush. So he starts to go through the bag where the toothbrush was, and he discovers these arrows and this arrow poison, which gets sent back to Europe and investigated. Now, part of the investigation identified 2 plants that produced the same poison. So the one, let me see if I can get these bigger again. So the one that I'm kind of hiding behind, this is a liana, and it is one of those sort of vine-like plants that grows through trees. This other one over here, this is Acanthera, which I've almost certainly mispronounced, and this is a shrub. So they are very different plants. They come from very different parts of the plant kingdom, but they both produce the same compound. And this compound is this. It was nicknamed warbane, which was from a local word for arrow poison. So this particular compound, just for the chemists, don't worry, I'm not going to go into the details of this. This is known as a cardiac glycoside. So there are 2 bits to this compound that you need to worry about, be concerned about. So this bit here, this hexagon that my finger is in the middle of, this is the glycoside. This is like a sugar, and this determines how soluble this compound is in water. The rest of the compound, that's the cardiac bit. That's the bit that interacts with the heart. Now, what it does with the heart is very, very specific. Even though they could do tests with this compound at the time and find out the effects of the compound, the details of what actually went on inside the cells of the heart wasn't determined until many, many years later. So what happens is when your heart beats, the individual cells, the cardiac myocytes in your heart, they contract, and it is the coordinated contraction of all of these cells in the heart muscle that causes the whole organ to contract. And obviously this has to be coordinated so that your blood pumps around the body the correct way. Now, some people can have a very weak, fluttering heartbeat. And what they found was that if you give these people Strophanthin, then it slows and it coordinates that heartbeat. Now, obviously, if you give someone too much of this, it slows that heart rate until it stops. And if your heart stops, then I'm afraid that's a very rapid death because you need this organ to keep going from one moment to the next, to keep blood pumping around you, delivering that oxygen and removing waste products. So inside these cells, what's going on is you have sodium moves into the cells and it's followed by calcium. And that means that when the calcium is present, ligaments or filaments inside the cell slide over each other. So the actual cell itself gets shorter. And of course, if you've got lots of cells getting shorter, that corresponds to a big contraction in the muscle. So then, once you've got the contraction, the sodium is pumped out and the calcium follows, and the filaments slide back to their original position, and the heart relaxes. Now, to move the sodium out of the cell, you have little pumps. And what this particular compound does, this warbane or this cardiac glycoside, it slows that pump down. So the sodium stays inside the cell for longer, the calcium stays for longer, and the filaments contract more and for longer. So you get that stronger, more intense contraction of your heart. So this is a fantastic heart medicine, and it was formulated and sold exactly as that, to treat various heart conditions. The problem with this particular compound was that it's not easy to absorb into the body through the gut, which is fantastic if you're a hunter because you want to be able to eat the meat that you kill using this poison. It's just not so good as a medicine. It means you have to inject this stuff, and people are reluctant to have to regularly inject themselves. People much prefer taking pills. People don't even like taking pills very much, but it's considerably easier than injecting yourself with a compound daily. So this particular medicine, it never really took off because of the difficulty of administering it. It also had a problem because it was competing with another heart medicine, and that heart medicine is one that Christie knew an awful lot about. It's this one here, which is a digitalis derivative. So digitalis, you might know, comes from foxgloves, and it is also a cardiac glycoside. So if you put the two side by side, you can see that digitalis down the bottom has 3 of these sugar residues. So it's very, very soluble in water, which means you can swallow it in pill form. This has only got 1, so this is the warbane from the African plants. It's only got 1 sugar, but you can see that the cardiac bits are pretty similar. So they have a very similar effect on the body. It's just the advantages of digitalis have been known for a long, long time. You could grow it locally rather than having to travel to Africa and trying to source the raw material to extract the stuff. And you could swallow this rather than having to inject it. So digitalis was always the more dominant medicine. It's also, again, it will cause exactly the same problems if you have too much of it. Christie was well aware of this, and she used digitalis poisoning in a number of her plots. Appointment with Death is one that springs to mind, where you have the horrible Mrs. Boynton, who's given an excess of this stuff to mimic the symptoms of the condition she already has. She already has a heart condition, so everyone just assumes that it's natural causes, and the murderer would have got away with it if Hercule Poirot hadn't been just down the road and took an interest. So I think it's very interesting that Christie picked this as a particular poison. It's very rapid in its action, which means that you don't have to waste pages and pages of people lingering before they die, and we can crack on with the interesting bit of solving the puzzle of who done it. It also means that if you're stealing it from a pharmacy, as they do in this particular short story, it's less likely to be missed than, say, something that's more commonly used, such as digitalis. So, a dusty bottle at the back of the shelf, people aren't going to notice that that's gone missing for a long time. You're more likely to get away with it. So it is an interesting use of a poison. And if you have questions about Strophanthin, by all means, ask. Now, just pause for a second. Okay, so that's poison number one. Poison number two is again an obscure one. Now, the idea of using arrow poisons is a well-worn trope in detective stories. People have been doing it since detective stories have been written. Obscure poisons on the tips of arrows from tribes in far-flung parts of the world. It's all very exotic, it's all very interesting, and it means that you don't have to go into the details of the science because it's obscure science. So it's very convenient for crime writers to delay having to reveal what the poison is or who the killer is. Now, obviously, Christie knew all of this, but she never mentions the arrow poison aspects of Strophanthin. But she did use arrow poisons, usually as a kind of knowing wink. It's always as a red herring. She says, yeah, anyone drops dead on a fancy carpet in a country house, it's an arrow poison from some obscure tribe. No, it is very usually quickly sorted out that it is not an obscure poison because Christie would never ever be so obvious. Unless, of course, she's writing Death in the Clouds, or I think it's Death in the Air in the US. Don't know why they changed the title, much the same thing. So, Death in the Clouds, in case you haven't read it, in case you haven't seen the TV adaptation, you're not familiar with the plot, give you a brief outline of what's going on. This is Christie's interpretation of the locked room mystery. So this is another well-worn trope in detective fiction. You have a limited number of suspects in a fixed space, which means you have to figure out either how the murderer got in and out, or you've got a reduced number of suspects, which makes things a lot easier to plot. In Death in the Clouds, we have Hercule Poirot on a short flight between Paris and Croydon in southeast England, which is not a very long flight at all. Whilst he's up in the air just over the channel, he's absolutely swaddled up in scarves and coats because he's always feeling a chill and he's a very poor traveller. So he's got his eyes shut and he's just trying to ignore the nausea that he's experiencing and just get through the flight and get to the other end. But then he starts to hear mutterings of a passenger that's been taken ill and might be dead. So he decides to rouse himself and he shuffles along the aisle and he discovers, along with other members of the crew and passengers, that there is a lady towards the back of the plane who is dead in her seat. Now, her death is clearly very, very sudden, so there is a question mark as to what on earth has gone on. And they notice a little mark on her neck. And a fellow passenger says, there was a wasp buzzing around earlier. I killed it. Look, it's here in the saucer of my coffee cup. So they're like, okay, she had maybe anaphylactic shock, a very sudden, very violent reaction to this wasp sting, and she died. But then Poirot notices on the floor that there's a little dart, a little arrow. And he notices that the tip of this arrow has been discolored. And he suspects, quite rightly, obviously, because he's Hercule Poirot, that this is the poisoned arrow or the poisoned dart that has been injected or pressed into the victim's neck to deliver the poison and bring about her rapid death. Now, of course, they analyze this poison This is a genuine dart. This is an artifact that someone has recovered from deepest, darkest South America. And they find the traces, tiny, tiny traces of the original arrow poison, which is a strychnine-like compound. And Christie knows all about strychnine, read The Mysterious Affair at Styles. But that is not what has killed this unfortunate woman. On top of the strychnine that was left over from the arrow's original use, another poison has been added, and that poison is the venom from a toxic or venomous snake. So look away now if you don't like snakes, because there are lots of snakes that are venomous. You don't need me to tell you this. There are all sorts of very well-known species across the globe that would get instant recognition amongst Christie's readers. But Christie went for what I think is quite an obscure snake. She went for this guy, and this is a boomslang, which I think is probably quite rarely known outside of its native Africa. So it's very commonly known in Africa. It's got a very large area that it's distributed over. And boomslang is the Afrikaans word for tree snake, because this guy spends most of his life in trees and he's not really interested in humans. There is very, very few incidents of boomslang snakes being involved in human envenomations. And that's simply because mostly boomslangs ignore humans. If you provoke them, if you antagonize a boomslang snake, it will first of all swell up its neck so it looks big and intimidating. And if that doesn't put you off, if that doesn't give you a warning and you keep poking at the snake, it might bite you. Now, for a long time, people thought that this particular snake, even if it did bite you, it wouldn't do a very good job, because this snake has its fangs at the rear of its mouth. It's not got those big long fangs at the front that we know about from cobras and snakes like that. So you'd think, well, being at the back of the mouth, that wouldn't be a very effective place to bite into something as big as a human. But these snakes can open up their mouths almost 180 degrees, and unlike cobras and front fang snakes that will bite and retreat, these boomslangs will bite and they will hang on. And their venom will slowly trickle down, well, not so slowly, it will trickle down these fangs at the back of their mouth, and it will get into the wound. Now, snake venoms are fantastically complicated. There are huge numbers of compounds in all snake venom, and they vary not just between species, but also between individual populations of snakes. So they are almost bespoke to family groups of snakes or small regions of where these snakes are found. Even so, people thought that, okay, well, a boomslang might be able to bite you. It might be able to deliver its venom into you, but that venom, that's targeted towards mice, other small creatures. It's not really going to do any damage to humans. That was up until the 1950s, when a boomslang snake was a juvenile, not a full-grown snake, a juvenile snake was sent to a herpetologist in the United States for identification. So this snake turns up in a bag, and this herpetologist puts his hand into the bag, and the snake understandably bites him on the thumb. So he's got a tiny, only one fang actually goes into his thumb, and it barely makes it below the skin. And he looks at it and it's a boomslang, it's a juvenile, I'm not going to worry about it. But just for the sake of science, I will note down any symptoms so that we can learn something from this experience. So that's what he did. He went about his day and he just jotted down any symptoms that he felt. And he soon felt, well, a few hours later, he started to feel very, very unwell. He started to have stomach pains, headaches, all sorts of problems, and it became clear that he was in serious trouble. In fact, he was hospitalized, and they said to him that they really needed to give him treatment, but he said no. He refused all medical treatment because he wanted to document unadulterated by any pharmaceuticals, what this venom would do. So you would get a pure record for the scientific interest. And 24 hours after he got this tiny, tiny little bite from a junior snake, he was dead. So the ultimate sacrifice for science. So what we learnt from boomslang snakes is actually their venom is incredibly potent. It's more potent than cobra venom, but it works in a very different way. It interacts with how your blood system works. So there's lots of stuff going on, but the main problem is with how it interacts with your blood. Now, your blood is very important. Obviously, it is carrying oxygen around your body and removing waste. You quite normally, as part of day-to-day life, you get little cuts and tears and damage to your blood vessels. And to stop this vital fluid leaking out of your body, what happens is that you form clots. So there are molecules within your blood, fibrinogen. These are kind of like little threads, and when there is a cut or damage, these start to clot and tangle together into a kind of mesh. And this mesh captures other things like platelets, white blood cells, red blood cells to form a clot that blocks that damage to the blood vessel, and it prevents you from bleeding out. It also prevents any bacteria from moving into your blood system. So it's got two effects. What boomslang snake venom does is it disrupts this clotting mechanism. So if you get a little bit of venom, say into your thumb, it's not gone straight into a blood vessel. It will slowly leach from the muscle into the blood vessels, and it will start to cause clotting. And it might form tiny little clots continuously as more and more of the venom enters into your blood vessels. And it will mean that your clotting materials will be used up. You will be forming clots faster than your body can produce these clotting factors. That means that once they're all used up, you can't make new clots. And any damage to your blood vessels means that you start to bleed. So the symptoms of boomslang envenomation are that you start to bleed from the original bite mark. Also, old wounds can open up, but also internally you can start bleeding into your gut, which is why our herpetologist felt so sick, because he was bleeding into his stomach, he was bleeding from his kidneys, his liver, he was bleeding into his brain, which was why he was getting headaches. And it was this ultimate blood loss that killed him. This obviously was a very slow process. 24 hours, you can certainly make a flight from Paris to Southeast England in less than 24 hours. So you need to kill the victim in Death in the Clouds a lot quicker. And this is where the site of delivery becomes really important, because that particular arrow that was coated with boomslang venom was pressed into the neck and it went into the jugular vein. Now, this is obviously a major blood vessel, and if you introduce a lot of venom very quickly into the blood, you get big blood clots very quickly, and these can cause thrombosis. If that thrombosis, that big blood clot, moves to something like the heart or the lungs, then obviously you block major vessels, you cause all sorts of problems, and you can cause a very, very rapid death. Now, both these kind of scenarios are described in a book that was written in 1912 that I suspect Christie read, because she quotes almost word for word experiments on a jackal. A jackal was injected with boomslang venom to see what would happen, and that jackal died as though it had been shot. It was that quick. And that's the line that she quotes. She also discusses this bleeding that is caused, this problem with the blood clotting and bleeding under the skin. Now, this is very visible. And there's even a picture in this book that she read of what can happen. So this is an assistant to a herpetologist in South Africa who was bitten by a boomslang. And again, they weren't too worried about it, but he very rapidly got very sick and he ended up in hospital. Now, this photo has been doctored. It has the areas of bleeding under the skin have been darkened, but you can see the kind of extent and how very visible this stuff was. His colleague turned up in hospital to visit him whilst he was recuperating, and he said he was unrecognizable simply because of the damage that the snake venom had caused to this individual. Which means that surely someone on this airplane would have noticed this victim bleeding from their throat, bleeding under the skin, causing all sorts of discoloration. Yet no one during the flight actually noticed this and raised the alarm. So how did Christie get around this? Has she made a mistake? Well, I don't think she has, because she has her victim envenomated directly into a vein. The death is so rapid that that slow bleeding that under the skin that would have been visible just doesn't have time to manifest itself. It is simply a huge clot that presumably went to the heart and caused it to malfunction and very rapidly caused death. The only criticism that I can really make of Christie in this entire plot, and it might seem completely implausible, an obscure snake on board a plane, who gets hold of snake venom? Well, she comes up with all sorts of reasons why an awful lot of those passengers might have access to snake venom. She's not completely making stuff up on the fly. The only bit I can criticize her on is how quickly the boomslang venom is identified. And there are ways today that you can identify snake venom from corpses. So in potential murder accident cases, you can analyze the blood and very rapidly identify what species of snake the venom has come from. But that kind of technology has only really been around in the last few decades, certainly not when Christie was writing this story back in the 30s. So it's a technical problem that it would have been difficult for her particular scientist, pathologist, toxicologist to identify the poison in question. But she was ahead of the scientific field in that she realized just how deadly boomslang venom was 20 years, 10 years certainly, before our herpetologist realized to his cost in the United States. So in some respects, she's way ahead of her science, implausibly so. But it just shows that not everyone reads 1912 books about African snakes and their poisons. Now, there are lots of other examples of Christie's fantastic use of poisons. I'm going to stop there and invite anyone to ask questions if they have any. I hope you enjoyed a brief insight into Christie's kind of thinking and her use of poisons.
Okay, well, so I have many questions. That was amazing. But first, I want to say I love your use of Prezi, which we talked about before, to do your presentation where the presentation's on the side and you can kind of move it around right on the screen. So if anybody has any access to Prezi, this is how you do it. So thank you. That was really amazing. I want to remind everybody to put your questions in the Q&A, which is at a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I have opened up the chat so you guys can chat with each other. Sometimes it goes by too quick for me to catch all the questions. So first of all, we do have some questions, but I want to ask first, Kathryn, about your own history, about how, I know I didn't mention this earlier, but you are a chemist. So is that what got you interested in this, or were you always an Agatha Christie fan? What came first, the chicken or the egg?
They probably went in parallel for a long time. I certainly read Christie. I think as a lot of people do when I was a teenager. Yeah, my local library lent me a load of Poirot books when I was a teenager. I got through a lot of them. So I always liked Christie. But I always liked science as well. So I ended up studying science and chemistry at university. And I soon realized in doing science at university that I didn't enjoy the doing so much. I preferred the talking about science. So I shifted my career to talking about science rather than doing it. Full, I'm in awe of people who do it. It's not my skill set. So. I went into talking about science and I was asked by a publisher if I'd like to write a book about chemistry. And there are two types of chemistry books. There's ones on the periodic table and there's ones on toxicology. So I thought I would go down the poison route because everyone loves a good poisoning. But if you're going to talk about poisons, oh my God, you've got to talk about Agatha Christie because she is that good. So it seemed like the perfect combination, a
Mhm.
way to introduce people who love Agatha Christie into a bit of chemistry and people who love chemistry to be reminded about the fantastic world of Agatha Christie.
Mhm. So I thought I'd do a little bit of crowdsourcing here in the chat to ask people what was their favorite Agatha Christie book. And I was telling Catherine before we started that mine was And Then There Were None, but also The Body in the Library. And she told me an interesting fact, which was how many books did you figure out the end before you got to the end?
So I've read all of Agatha Christie's books, certainly all of her murder mysteries. So I think it's about 83 books, something like that. It's certainly in the 80s. I guessed once ahead of time. I had to find it out with everybody else who's gathered in the final, in the drawing room for the final denouement. I had to find out with everyone else in 82 cases out of 83.
That's amazing. I mean, you'd think like after a while you kind of get the rhythm and things like that, but
Oh no, never, never.
every one of her books is so unique. Um, so Susan says that she would have been able to commit the perfect murder. Are you talking, Susan,
Yeah,
are you talking
probably.
about, I mean, are you talking about Agatha or are you talking about Catherine now that she's read all the books? Just checking. And that Julie says Boomslang is used in potions in Harry Potter. Didn't realize it was a real animal. So
Mm-hmm.
yes. So
It is
Agatha,
a real.
yeah, yeah, I have no idea.
It's Agatha, yes, I think she probably would, if she was so inclined, be very good at committing the perfect murder. Obviously, she's never been charged. She's been it's been a while. I think they'd have found the bodies by now. So if she did kill them, she did an extremely good job. I would advise, though, you have to be of Agatha Christie's caliber to get away with it. It's very difficult to get away with murder. Very easy to kill people. Very, very difficult to get away with it. Don't do it.
Yeah. I loved your disclaimer at the beginning of like, this is not a tutorial. This is a almost a almost like a cautionary tale. Okay, so let me get into some questions from our audience. Brad says, Dr. Harkup said, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. Any thoughts as to why Christie would invent an imaginary barbiturate, Calmo, in the mirror cracked from side to side, rather than use her knowledge of pharmaceuticals to name a real drug used for this calming effect? She knows so many theater people, some of whom must have taken this stuff.
The Calmo, I'm not even sure how you pronounce it. It is the only example of an invented drug that is used to kill someone. Christie's writing fiction. She can make up anything if she wants to. It absolutely doesn't matter. The fact that she only ever did it once, I think, is fascinating. And I am moderately obsessed with The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side. It is an extraordinary novel. It is, again, so ahead of its time. So it was written in, I think, 62, 61, 61, published in 62. And it features this barbiturate-like drug called Calmo. Now, the late 50s, early 60s was kind of the heyday of tranquilizers. And what she is describing is not so much a barbiturate, but it's more like the new class of drugs, the tranquilizers. And she is writing before things like Valley of the Dolls or the Rolling Stones' Mother's Little Helper. She is way ahead of the cultural curve and noticing that these kind of drugs are very popular with celebrities because of victim or it certainly takes place in a celebrity's home where this stuff, it's just in every bathroom, it's all over the place. So it is very much the culture of the day. Now, why she took to inventing a drug, I don't know. She tweaks it a little bit. It is more lethal than most of the tranquilizers that were on the market at the time. It is possibly not, it's in the kind of lethality kind of uh, borderline with barbiturates, but it's slightly different to a barbiturate. But I don't know. I think maybe she read about this class of compounds and she's like, I'm just going to tap into that. One's being invented every week, by the sounds of it, which was pretty much true. So, she could just make up a name and she could pick characteristics from a variety of these compounds and make a very, very credible poison. So it's almost like, well, let's see if I can make something up that is credible but still works within a murder mystery. So, yeah, maybe she just wanted a bit of variety and to test her creative skills in inventing a poison. I don't know.
I wonder if she was almost like a sci-fi writer where like maybe now we could come up with the actual combo, like in real life.
Yeah, I mean, she's almost, yeah, it is more dangerous than most of all of the tranquilizers that you can get hold of today. But in terms of its effect, and she describes the symptoms very, very carefully, yeah, it's a compound that could easily exist.
Mhm. Well, Tish says the combo is a brilliant name. Wish the drug existed. So you never know. Ralph says, enjoyed your presentation. Are these poisons replicated in a lab?
Um, Things like snake venom, they are so complex that no, they are not replicated in a lab. They are still taken from natural sources. And as Christie points out in her novel, snake venoms were being investigated as potential pharmaceuticals because if you get the dose right, you could actually treat a condition within the body. And certainly today, there are more drugs that are being used that have been derived from snake venom. They are not the snake venoms or the applications that Christie was talking about. The science has changed and moved on, but it was certainly a theoretical possibility in Christie's day that she recognized. Um, in terms of Strophanthin and digitalis that I talked about before, again, they are pretty complex. They might be, well, they're not big protein structures or enzymes and things, but they are difficult to make in the lab. And so, yeah, we still get them from foxgloves and from plants and in Africa. Why would you go to the hassle of making this stuff when the plant will do it and you just grow it?
Karen asked, and this is an interesting question. Do you know about the dentist on trial in America for poisoning his wife? How do you catch doctors or anybody in these cases versus in mystery books?
I have not heard about the dentist on trial in America, but it does make me think of the dentist who is accused of murder in, oh God, I think it's called The Patriotic Murder in America. It's got a different title in the UK, but it's an Agatha Christie story where we have a deadly dentist. And obviously, it was the situation that interested Christie. Obviously, she's been sat in a dentist chair at some point in her life and gone, you know what? If someone wanted to kill me, this is the place to do it because you are totally vulnerable and you are expecting injections. So actually, it's not weird that someone is coming towards you with a syringe because it's part of the procedure. So she used this and she used actual dental anesthetics to kill her victim. Now, I don't know anything about the case in the United States. The problem is, as this person has pointed out, is detecting these people because they do work with dangerous compounds. Doctors, nurses, dentists, all of these people are licensed, trained to work with potentially very, very dangerous compounds. So what you do start to notice is when people die when they shouldn't. So I can't think of any reason, any dental procedure that you undergo that is lethal.
Hmm.
Now, there might be people who have very specific reactions to certain drugs, and it can go horribly wrong. But you would expect ambulances to be called, and them to be treated, and they will probably be okay. But if the ambulance is going to the same dentists regularly, I
Mm.
think, alarm bells are going to start to go off. And we've certainly had cases in the UK, and I know you've had them in the United States as well, where nurses, doctors who have access to these drugs have unfortunately used them for deadly purposes. And it is only when a pattern emerges that unfortunately these people are traced and brought to justice, because it is very difficult if this is part of the treatment and treatments can go wrong. You can blame it on natural causes. Again, this is not a recommendation if you are working in the medical profession, because these people are found.
Hmm. Yeah. Ian says that it was called One Two Buckle My Shoe in the UK.
Yes, it was one two buckham, but it was called I think it was called the Patriotic Murders in America. Again, they seem to like changing the titles when they publish them in the States. Sometimes it made sense because there were some very quirky, very British titles that perhaps didn't translate well to American markets, but I don't know. They called it the Patriotic Murders.
Hmm. So what before we started talking, one of the things I had mentioned was that, your first book about these poisons was A is for arsenic, and then you went to V is for venom. So you had mentioned that each chapter of yours starts with a letter, and I was just like, and I had asked, is B is for botulism, but what are some of the other poisons?
So from V is for A is for arrow poison. So I talked about two. B is for bacterial poisons, which would be botulism, or it would be anthrax that Christie used, or typhoid, or things like that. C is for the drug we just talked about. Oh God, where do we go from there? Do we go for E? I can't remember. G is for gas. H is for hydrochloric acid. J is for jasmine. O is for oxalic acid. P is for procaine. S is for scopolamine. The
That's
choice
amazing.
I got 28 poisons out of Agatha Christie, and all of them, well, across two books. So there are some overlaps with letters between the two books. But yeah, in each book, 14 poisons with a different starting letter. It would make one, those kids have those alphabet prints on the wall. I think the
Mhm.
adult version would be the
The
poisons.
poisons.
I,
Yeah.
sh I should start up a sideline of making those.
I would totally buy that. I think that would be a hoot to have up in my office wall. So, um, what when you so we're putting together Agatha Christie and the poisons, what part of it do you feel like people could actually use, like in terms of like um, keeping away from poisons, maybe?
Yeah. So I would say that people who use Agatha Christie as inspiration for poisoning usually get found out very
Hmm.
quickly, because the search of that, there was a case in France where a guy poisoned someone, and when they searched his apartment, they found an Agatha Christie book that just kind of fell open at the poison page, and there was, underlining, and then they found the clippings of all the details of the poison. So don't leave that kind of stuff around in your home. I mean, I'm done for if the police ever come around here, but so don't leave that stuff laying around. On the other side of it, there are, I would say, one of my favorite novels, Agatha Christie novels, and it changes all the time, but a regular favorite is The Pale Horse. And this is one of her, I think, best later novels. It is a fantastic story, and it uses a very obscure poison, which is thallium. But her descriptions of thallium poisoning were so accurate that people actually recognized that their friends were being poisoned and were able to intervene. So that particular novel is credited with saving two lives simply because of Christie's dedication to getting it right.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
there is, genuine benefits to reading Agatha Christie. And I would say that if you're put off, a lot of the people watching this will have read Agatha Christie and will know it's just a joy to read. If you haven't read Agatha Christie and you're thinking, well, it sounds like a science lesson, it really isn't. Christie is one of the best science communicators out there, simply because she presents all the science you need to solve the crime, and you never ever feel like it's a science lesson, but it is invariably accurate and it is invariably useful, potentially if you know someone or you yourself are wary about what's growing in your garden or your partner's talking about life insurance and things like that. So, you can do a lot worse than read up on some Agatha Christie.
A lot worse. Donna says, and this is really interesting because of what I know of your books. Do you recommend reading A is for arsenic before V is for venom?
It really doesn't matter. They are not meant to be read in order. You don't even have to read the book itself in order. I try and make the chapters themselves almost standalone. So they're just like essays on a particular poison. So you don't need to go through in order. It depends on your interest. I mean, if you want to read about the classics that you know about, the arsenic, the cyanide, the strychnine, the stuff that crops up quite often in Agatha Christie stories, go for A is for arsenic. But if you've read more of her short stories, more of her less well-known stories and less more obscure poisons, then V is for venom.
Mhm. Okay. Nadia, who is coming to us from Chile, it asks, is digitalis an appointment with death for the letter D? I kind of
Yes,
started somewhere.
it is D is for digitalis, and that's in the book A is for arsenic.
Funny. Okay, so I have 5 more minutes. I want to ask about your favorite poison used in an Agatha Christie book. I'm not sure if it's one that was you've already mentioned, but what did you think was the most creative poison that Agatha used in one of her books, and
Uh,
why?
I would say one of her best uses of poison in a story is from a book. It's from a novel called It's Five Little Pigs in the UK. I think it's Murder in Retrospect in the States. And it's a painter who is poisoned. And many, many years later, Poirot is brought in to investigate because they realize that the wrong person has been convicted. So it's a cold case kind of scenario before cold cases were even a thing. So the poison in question is known and it's discussed throughout the novel. It is hemlock, which is, I think, a pretty well-known poison. It's what Socrates was forced to drink for as punishment for corrupting the youth of Athens, because that's what they did. So the symptoms were very well known, and they are even bits of Plato are read out in Christie's novel to explain the symptoms and explain what should happen. She talks about its pharmaceutical use, past and present, and it is such a part of the novel. It is so well integrated into the plot, and it is so brilliantly, the symptoms are so well placed that I can't imagine using any other poison.
Mhm.
And apparently when she first plotted that novel, she was going to have a victim shot, and it's like, how on earth? Oh, she's Agatha Christie. She could have figured it out. But honestly, how on earth would you make that work? And so, yeah, that is a prime example of how everything just slots together so brilliantly with her particular choice of poison.
Mhm. I love that. So I know that V is for Venom just came out or very recently. So are you already working on your next book?
Supposedly,
I know your publicist is here, so you might not want to talk too much about it.
no, it's fine. I think it's out there. I don't think I'm breaking any non-disclosure whatever things. The next book, and it's not going to be for a while. Don't hold your breath. It's going to be basically how to get away with murder. Which, I mean, it sounds like a how-to guide. It's not really. It's looking at a lot of past cases where there were dodgy convictions, where they are unsolved, and kind of looking at the progress of not just forensic science, but also the methods of investigation, how police work and psychologists and psychiatrists work, and all of those kind of people have made it far, far less likely that you'll get away with murder today.
Mhm. And this is so fascinating because your books are so different. I mean, obviously you have these poisons with Agatha Christie, but you also have Making the Monster, The Science of Mary Shelley Frankenstein, Death by Shakespeare, Super Spy Science, Science and Death in the Tech World, of James Bond. I mean, how do you pick your topics?
There is a common theme, and that common theme is death, basically.
Hmm.
It's anything in and around death. So the Christies, the Shakespeare, the James Bond, it's mostly franchises in the loose sense of the word franchise, where lots of people die in creative ways. And I explore those as a means of investigating science because people love murder, people love death. Look at, Sunday afternoon telly. There's a death every 5 minutes. And in the most creative ways, we lap this stuff up. So it's a good way for me to engage people about science. So that's the common theme, I would say. So yeah, I just look for big franchises where lots of people die in interesting ways.
There are plenty, sadly,
Well,
I
I,
guess.
I don't know. I think I am running out.
Oh, really? I'll have to do some research for you.
Yeah, send me a list.
Oh, I'm sure your research is quite well done without me, but I so appreciate this talk. It's been fascinating. People in the chat have been really loving it, and they are running out to read your books because they sound amazing. Thank you so much for spending your hour with us, and we look forward to whatever you write in the past and in the future.
Thank you very much. It was good fun.
Good. And for everybody who's been here, thank you for your questions. And I look forward to seeing you again at some other event that hopefully doesn't give us teach us how to kill people. Um, yeah.
Fingers crossed. Please don't kill
There
people.
are some sketchy people, so some sketchy comments there. So I'm going to keep an eye on people, but I do appreciate this and I have enjoyed every minute. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.